All right. Here we go. We're still on 1991, day 2. We're going to finish talking about the Berlin Wall today. And as I was studying the 5,000-year leap for this week, it seemed like the last principle really is important for us to talk about as we finish up our history year. So I want to go through that today as well, because I think it goes along with our topic and with some of what's happened in this country with our Constitution. So we're going to go through that principle as well. It might be slightly short. I don't know. I can never tell how much I'm going to talk. I'm a talker, as you all know. But I might not have a full hour, but that's all right. I don't think that's an issue. Put that over there in case anybody needs to get a hold of us, and Miranda can take care of the phone. Okay, yesterday, as we finished, we were talking about the wall, the Berlin Wall, and it was just kind of the symbol of the Cold War. And really, it was just kind of a symbolize the division between that country and this country, and between good and evil. And as we've talked and learned more, I have felt like this nation has really not stayed true to what the original intent is of the founding fathers. I don't think that we've improved and perpetuated the Constitution. I feel like we've left it behind, and it would be very wise to return to it, but that will take a lot. Nevertheless, I do think it is vital that we all know and understand the Constitution, because there is no way to restore something that nobody knows. And the founding fathers spent so much time and effort studying it out, and they didn't just copy some other form of government that they'd seen. This was completely new. And so it's not something that has been replicated or duplicated anywhere. However, many countries' constitutions after ours are somewhat based on our Constitution. And so you can see that a lot of the good from our Constitution spread through the world. It has probably been one of the freest times among all of mankind in the history of the world. And that is saying something. And I know that the Lord needed that in order to be able to spread his gospel, in order to be able to gather a covenant people so that there could be people prepared for the Savior. Now, that said, we are not the covenant people if we aren't living our covenant. If we are involved in Babylon in any way, we aren't living our covenants the way we should. The Lord talks about he cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. That leaves all of us in trouble. It leaves all of us in trouble. And so our efforts daily have to be, are my decisions today decisions that are celestial? Would my Heavenly Father do this if he were here, or my Savior? And that kind of needs to be our thought process all the time. You need to step back from everything you ever do. And does this, if it helps, would this be in the temple? That's just not the kind of film I think we'd see in the temple, or whatever it is we're doing. Would I act this way if I knew the Savior was here? There's all sorts of questions to ask yourself to go with your activities. And fortunately and blessedly, we have the gift of redemption and repentance, and it is real. And boy, do we need it. We've always needed it. We always will need it. And so what was started here in this country, we know was authorized and ordained by the hand of God. We learned that in the Doctrine and Covenants. But only those laws that allow for the agency of men and true freedom and liberty are in alignment with the Constitution. So any law that's not in alignment with the Constitution is not of God. And a lot of what we see happening right now is governor's orders and executive orders, and those are not law. That's tyranny. That is not the way it's supposed to happen. They don't have those kinds of emergency powers that they're proclaiming, but the police are defending it in many cases. And so it leaves us in a situation of realizing how far behind we have left our Constitution. Now, let's go back to our talk of Berlin, because 28 years 28 years we had a wall in Berlin dividing East from West, symbolizing that standoff between the East and the West and the Cold War. Cold War meaning, do you guys remember what we talked about yesterday, what it means to have a Cold War?
No bullets.
Yeah, no fighting, no bullets, and yet there's a standoff stance. We're not really at peace either. We're building up our arms and trying to keep ourselves ready for the attack should it come, and hopefully not being the aggressor. So the wall comes down in 1989. November 9th, to be exact. Happens to be my sister's birthday. I don't even know if she knows that happened on her birthday in 1989. But November 9th, 1989, the wall began to come down. So let's read a little thing. It says, just before midnight, the announcement of the wall's demise came on November 9th, 1989. And here's a quote. Cheers rang out when the first East Berliners strode through the wall, waving their identity papers. The wall was down. Strangers embraced. Tears flowed. Champagne corks popped. It was a dream come true. Berlin was whole again. Joyous crowds poured into the streets. Screaming, yelling, and tooting trumpets. Drivers blared their car horns. A local radio station described the tumultuous celebration as Christmas, New Year's, and Easter's rolled into one. For years, young West Berliners had decorated the wall with graffiti, some of it bitter, some of it sarcastic, some of it nonsensical. But tonight, they scaled the wall and danced on the gravestone of Stalinism. They reached out to their neighbors in the East and pulled them up to join them. People brought hammers and chisels and screwdrivers and began to smash away at the slabs of concrete that had kept them divided for 3 decades. They wanted to pulverize it, turn it to dust, but they settled for chipping away bits and pieces for souvenirs, and the East German border guards stood by and watched the sacrilege. Okay? So this is just, I don't know where this came from because it just says, oh, here it is. The wall came down. This is from Jerry Bornstein, who wrote this article in 1990. And it's in the Arch Cape Press. I don't really know where that was printed, but that's who wrote that. And there will be some more quotes that we'll give today. But I want to share a little something with you because before it came down, we still have that stonewalling between leaders. And the president of the Soviet Union of the time is Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay? Now, because all of this came apart during his lifetime and during his time, many people look at him as a better communist than most. He's a communist, straight up. Okay? And then our president at the time, it's not taking a change. It's Ronald Reagan. Oops, not what I meant to do. Go away. Okay, whoops. This is our president at the time. His name is Ronald Reagan. I believe he is the oldest president we've ever had. However, you can't tell by his hair because he colored it. Now,
looks great to me.
There might be some gray in there at that point. Ronald Reagan was an actor turned politician, a Democrat turned Republican. So who knows what he actually was?
Republican turned president.
Well, Republican is just a party. Some people love him. Some people hate him. I think he's a man. He is a president who had an assassination attempt against him. We have had 2 presidents assassinated, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, we know, was assassinated by someone with communist leanings. Ronald Reagan, the assassination attempt, the guy was just considered to be a mental patient. But I know that Ronald Reagan called Dr. Skousen, needing some advice, needing some help, saying, they are after me. What do I do? So I know that at least in part, he turned to a good man who understands the Constitution and was a champion for it throughout his life, and that is Cleon Skousen. But Ronald Reagan is the president during the time of the Berlin Wall coming down. He was elected in 1988. Here he is at the Berlin Wall. He's giving a speech in which he told Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down. And if I've got the right slide, nope, here's the right slide. Here is Ronald Reagan giving that speech. Let's see if we'll be able to hear it.
Mom. Oh, okay.
Hopefully it's bringing up the, yep. I hope it's loud enough. Come on, where's my mouse?
General Secretary Gorbachev.
Hang on a second. Let me pause it so I can make it big.
And lower.
And as loud as I can make it. Unfortunately, laptops aren't always very loud. So let me take it back to the beginning.
If you
Sometimes you just have to be smarter than your computer. I'm not always smarter than my computer. Here we go.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Okay, so that was the challenge given by Ronald Reagan. I do not want to go to the next video. At the wall, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate. And then you heard all the cheering. It took probably 30 seconds for it to get quiet enough for him to even finish his speech. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, if he was nothing else, he was a good speech maker. And he had good speech writers because they usually don't write their own speeches. These are all the ones we've already looked at. So here we are with the people dancing on the wall, sitting on the wall. Notice when I read the quote before that it talked about graffiti on the wall, but the graffiti was on the west side where the people were free, not on the east side where they couldn't get to the wall. Remember, they had a large space in between. So here you can see panels of the wall down. Parts of the wall are still up. It is not completely torn down, but it is free travel between both points now. And people have pieces of the wall as souvenirs and things like that. We're weird as people. Here's another picture. You can see the East German soldiers standing there as it's going on. Remember, the first person to cross that line was an East German soldier who stepped over the barbed wire and ran. So just because they lived there and just because they were a soldier does not necessarily mean they agreed with what was happening with their government. Maybe they did. I really don't know. But it's hard to judge what people really... More people standing on the wall, dancing on the wall, flags flying. You know, the division here is people of the same country, people of the same cultures, people of the same ethnicity and background, same language. People who at one point were not just the same city, they were the same country. Divided by a war, started by a madman, in which most of the people fighting were more ponds than anything else. Here's a different picture, and this is not of the wall coming down. This is part of what was happening as it was being put up. See that? Okay. And our last picture. This was the language just outside of it. It's written in English, Russian, French, and the last language, the smallest letters, German. You are leaving the American sector. So that would have been Checkpoint Charlie. Okay. Well, that's all the pictures I have. I will actually, this is a slide presentation that I have on the drive. And so I will actually throw it into an email to everyone if you would like to look at those pictures a little more closely. It's kind of hard on here. I wish that YouTube Live had the ability for me to share my screen in that way. It's one of the drawbacks to it, but we can go as long as we need to with YouTube Live, which is great. And we don't get that with Zoom meetings, and I can record it so you don't have to watch it lifetime. So I wish that they had that as a possibility. Maybe that's in the works, but it isn't available yet.
You can record on Zoom.
Yeah, you can record on Zoom, but you have to pay for it. Whereas my YouTube video streaming and stuff is just part of, well, I guess I pay for YouTube too, but I'm already paying for it. But not everybody that streams on YouTube is actually paying. So anyway, I pay for it so I can listen to videos without advertisement. I can't stand the advertisements. So anyway, the wall comes down. November 9th, 1989, the wall comes down. It kept people and friends and family apart, divided a nation, it divided a continent, it divided a world. And it gave this coming down, kind of gave a really bizarre stability between the East and the West. Because communism obviously fails. It doesn't work. Now, people who try to push communism again and again and again will always say this. This will be their argument. You're right. It didn't work for them, but it's because they weren't doing it right. They just didn't do it the right way. If they did it right, it would work.
And nobody does it right.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't create the prosperity that they always promise that it's going to create when everything's equaled out and everybody has the same. And people will make the comparison between communism and what we practiced originally in the church, the United Order. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. They have some similarities that cause people to think they're the same thing. But in communism, there's no personal ownership and no personal stewardship. Everything belongs to the state. Nobody actually owns anything. And anything you have can be taken from you at any time. As opposed to the United Order, where yes, you would take what you own and you would deed it over to the United Order. And then in agreement with the bishop. So you had to agree and the bishop had to agree to what your family's needs are. If you both agree, then you can be a part of the United Order. If you both don't agree, you don't join it. It's not ever by force. It is always by choice. The Lord never forces. He won't force us into the celestial kingdom. He didn't force us into this world. We chose it. And so there's a stewardship, there's an agreement of what are my needs, there's that ability to make things thrive and grow because you have a stewardship over it. You have a responsibility for it. And then at the end of each year, you could decide again, okay, I have more than I need, I will deed more, or I will donate more back to the bishop. You know, you'd give an accounting, you know. And if for some reason you had needs, those needs would then be met by what the excess was in the storehouse. Again, upon agreement with the bishop. The bishop was not required to agree with you. You were not required to agree with him, because either way would put one of you under the control of the other. Now, the United Order only works with a people who are pure in heart. We know that it worked in 4th Nephi. And we hear those people described as the happiest people. But they didn't have sin. They really were just for whatever reason, after the Savior came to this continent, they were able to live that for nearly 200 years. The people in the city of Enoch lived that. That's why they were translated and able to be translated, taken up to heaven. Translated beings generally have more work to do on this earth, and that's why the Lord would translate them. So I don't know what the work is for the city of Enoch. The people of the Nephites were not translated, but after 200 years, they began to have things, it says, no more common among them. And there began to be pride entering in. But they are not similar systems. So if anybody ever tries to have that argument with you, you need to know enough about the United Order to recognize the difference so that you are not, one, taken in by that false argument, but two, you might, if they're not just wanting to argue with you, some people just want to argue. Some people don't know. They don't have knowledge of it. Someone who doesn't have knowledge might possibly listen to you. Someone who just wants to argue, you just say, well, that's not what I've studied. I agree to disagree, because you aren't going to convince them. And that's the reality of all of us as humans. When we believe something is true and we have no room to study it out and look for possible error, we will not ever be convinced. And so that's just something to be aware of in any of your conversations with people. But let's see, where do we want to go with this?
When I was a missionary in Israel, I had several families
Mm-hmm.
that were trying to tell us that we were communists.
Because you were members of the church?
Yep.
And the United Order?
Yep.
See,
And
that
so
lack
I
of
had-
understanding.
So I had to tell them, no, you're wrong. We're not communists, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
So we had to know why.
Yeah.
What was the difference between communism and the United Order? And if you could do that, then oftentimes there wasn't a problem. But
Yeah.
if you couldn't, you were just stuck.
Well, and certainly if you're trying to do missionary work and you have somebody who might possibly even be interested, they weren't going to be interested as long as they felt like the church was a communist group, right? And so that would be extremely important to know. And even if you were not able to teach them the gospel, if you could help them to just understand truth better, then you create more of a friend and a friendly relationship. And that's an important thing to have. You will not always teach everyone and have them accept what is true. But if you can teach people, they at least have some knowledge to work with, right? Because as we've talked about before, that whole wall was a mockery of the Marxist system. Why? Because it proved that it didn't work. It was not this creation of class-conscious workers who wanted, workers of the world unite as one of the slogans, that they use with that. And it wasn't these class-conscious workers that wanted, liberality and freedom and liberty and equality for everyone. That's not actually what it was. Instead, it was something that was rammed down their throats against their will. Did the East German people want to be communist just because the war ended and they decided that Russia got to take care of that part of Germany? No, not at all. But that was what they were given as really a punishment. The punishment to Germany after World War II was that they were not a sovereign nation. They didn't have the right or the ability to take care of themselves. They couldn't have an army. They couldn't have a true government. And so that is something that was taken from them. But if it works, you don't have to lock it up behind concrete and barbed wire. If it works, you have the opposite problem. Remember how many people were trying to get out of the East to the West? That's what happens when it works. People try to get there. How many people try to come across the borders of the United States?
Tons.
Lots. Why? Because it works. When it's done right, it works. Okay? So here is more of that article. It says, suddenly and unexpectedly, history moved with blinding speed. And it was. It was just like, boom, overnight, Cold War over. I told you yesterday, as I grew up, okay, if you go back to my mother's era, that's when they would have their, we had fire drills. they had atomic bomb drills, right? And bomb shelters. And I've watched, the funny thing is that the films were almost identical. Duck under your desk and cover. What will that do for an atomic bomb? Nothing. In a fire drill, you're hurried to get out. If it was a tornado drill, I lived in Oklahoma for about a year. A tornado drill, you crawl under the desk and you cover because things often would fall, right? If it was an earthquake drill, jump under the desk and cover. But the films were so identical. It was like, does that actually work? No. So, but in my day, that's what the whole thought process was, is that World War III would start because of the conflict between the United States and Russia. There's no freedom of religion in Russia. I read to you what President Benson experienced when he went to Russia. And, you know, they did have a church, but there wasn't a freedom. And what had been happening with missionary work during this time is that sometimes you would have someone of the Soviet Union. They would end up in one of the countries neighboring, and they might hear about the gospel and even learn about it and maybe even join the church while they were out of their country. But if the mission president was able to give them permission to be baptized and join the church, they went home to no support system. There was no way to meet as a church. There was no way to pay your tithing, receive the sacrament. You didn't have a temple available to you. You know, so if you had permission to travel maybe to Switzerland or Germany, Germany is actually, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But if you had permission to go there, then you might be able to go take your temple endowments out. But you just didn't have that support system. And so I remember, because I was working in 1989, 1990, somewhere around that time frame, I was working in a store, and one of the girls I worked with had a brother who received his mission call to Russia. And they were opening some of the first Russian missions, because as this happened, as the wall came down, things were crumbling within the Soviet Union. So a lot of what they had done was absorbed other countries and made them a part of their whole conglomerate. That's why they call them the United Soviet Socialist Republics, which that was a misnomer. They were never republics, right? Socialist republics. All of those countries that have been absorbed, some of them had been independent nations before, and they pulled away a little bit. So they had a little bit more freedom. Sometimes they even became their own country. That was still hard to do. There was enough power in Russia. It was still hard for them to pull away. But that freedom of religion began to enter. And you know that the church never sets up a mission unless they have official sanction to do so. They work within the laws of the countries that they're working in. And so I remember when her brother got his mission call and she came into work and said where he was going, and we all were just dumbfounded. It was a wow moment. It's the same way you would feel if you heard that a mission opened up in Saudi Arabia,
Where's
or
Saudi
Kuwait,
Arabia?
or Iraq, or Egypt, any of those Arab countries where Christians are being killed. They don't recognize Christianity because they're Arab and generally Islamic. And as part of the Quran, anyone who is not Arab, who is not part of Islam, is considered an infidel. And it is legal to kill them. Now, many Islamic people are wonderful, lovely people. I know some. They have the same feelings about needing to serve others as we do. And I've told you the story about Rohan when we were building that room in our garage, because we just kept having babies and we needed another bedroom. So Dad's office, we actually just framed out a small corner of the garage and put some wallboard up. But neither he nor I know a thing about electricity. And so here comes Rohan. He says, can I help you? He's like, well, I'm trying to put this light in. Oh, I know about electricity. Let me do it for you. Because we were going to have to hire somebody. And he came in and he just wired it and put the light up for us. And he sold it straight up. So part of my beliefs in Islam is that I need to serve others. And so thank you for letting me serve you. I mean, to him, it was his privilege to serve us. And so they are lovely people. They really, really are. And I just finished listening to a book. Actually, we just finished listening to a book called Son of Hamas. You must listen to or read this book. This book, now Hamas, we're kind of getting off topic, but Hamas is one of the Arab terrorist groups. And son of Hamas, this young man was the son of one of the Hamas leaders, but his father was really an Islam, I don't know what their term is for them, but a religious leader. He really was not a terrorist. He didn't plan or carry out any of the attacks. And one of the things that he realized, this young man, I don't remember his name at all. Do you guys remember?
Masab.
Masab?
Wasab. It's with a W. I looked at now.
Wasab? Okay.
Wasab.
Wasab. One of the things he realized is that, how did he describe it? He's described Islam as a ladder. And people at the bottom are the ones doing good and serving and believing those 5 pillars of Islam. But as they grow in Islam, they get more to this radical terrorist nature of Islam. This is how he describes it. These are not my words, but his description of it is that many don't realize what these upper rungs of the ladder actually are. And he certainly didn't. And so that was kind of how he described it. Anyway, this book, wow. And if you have the one on audio tape, he's telling his own story. It's him reading the book. So you actually hear all of those Arab words said with the right accent. You're like, I'd have never said it that way.
And then there's a documentary about it.
Oh, is there a documentary
On
about it too?
ZionTube.
On ZionTube.
Son of the Green Prince. Or
Oh, the
something
Green
like
Prince?
Yeah.
Okay, we haven't watched that one yet. We need to watch it soon. So just to get yourself a picture of what's going on here, because this is where the world is now. This is a part of 1991, is when the Cold War ended and communist Russia is still communist. Okay? They still hate America. But with the Berlin Wall coming down and with the Soviet Union kind of crumbling at that point, we all went, oh. This is kind of this collective sigh of relief because we thought, oh, now we don't have this superpower standoff, right? We are free of that. And we had no idea what was brewing in the Middle East. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But it says a new wind swept across Eastern Europe in 1989, and the Soviet bloc system collapsed, imploding under the weight of its own internal contradictions. The Soviet Union was mired in an economic and political crisis at home, as Mikhail Gorbachev struggled to reform a stagnant system before it became forever irrelevant. Moscow relaxed its grip on its satellite regimes, giving the signal that they were free to go their own way without fear of interference from the Kremlin. On November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and no one mourned its death, except perhaps for a few border guards who worried that they might lose their jobs. These aren't my words. I'm just reading this article. And so we really, it was so fast. Things changed so fast. It was unbelievable, really. I mean, we knew communism still existed, but all of a sudden, Russia wasn't the same threat that they were before. Are they still a threat to us? Absolutely. Absolutely. But for a while, we didn't think that they were. And so we went from superpowers in a standoff position at all times to just one remaining superpower, the United States. And what we were looked at was a world leader, a global policeman, and a universal provider. are any of those under the Constitution and in the definition of what the founding fathers expected of our country?
We were not
World
meant to be the
leader.
babysitter.
Global policeman, universal provider.
The babysitter.
Mhm. So in August 1990, we've got world government leaders meeting on Capitol Hill, and they're talking about two problems. One, what military strength do we still need in world conditions? So we're just talking about less than a year later. And what do we do about the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq? Now, we talked about that when we talked about the Middle East. You guys remember talking about Iraq invading Kuwait?
Yep.
Okay.
It even talks about it in Son of Hamas.
It does talk
He
about it. in
gives a
Son of
little
Hamas.
bit about it.
A little bit. Yeah. It was really interesting to hear it from the standpoint, the viewpoint of someone who lived it from the Islamic side.
Yep.
It was really fascinating. I cannot recommend that book enough. It was really good. And so they were talking about, demilitarizing and bringing down the forces so we didn't need as much. Now, remember, one of the principles of prosperity and principles of being able to maintain your liberty and freedom is to have enough power that they don't want to attack you, that they're worried about the reprisal if they were to attack you. So you have to have sufficient strength that nobody wants to attack you, but not so much that there's the constant temptation, because you have troops standing and they're bored, the constant temptation to go to war. So that what is that balance, right? What do you actually need to be safe, but not have that temptation of sending the troops off to war?
Well, here's the weird thing. We have troops all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
but
We
not
do.
here.
We shouldn't. They're not allowed. We have military bases.
Right.
It's
we
actually
also
not
have them
legal
all
for the. It's
over
not
the
legal
place.
for the president to turn them on us as a people. So when he talks about calling out the troops to make sure everybody gets their immunization for COVID-19,
He's not allowed to do that.
not constitutionally. Not only is he not allowed to do it, it isn't constitutional to force me to have a vaccination. That goes against the Nuremberg Agreement. Those are acts that are unconscionable, that were decried after the end of World War II, because that's what Hitler was doing. Forced medical procedures. That's a forced medical procedure. And so actually that's not constitutional to call them out on us. Here's what I want you to see and why I'm going to talk about the 28th principle today. Between August of 1990 and January of 91, George H. Bush carefully maneuvered America into its new role. Okay? As explained by the president, America would become the leader of a new coalition of partners among the various world countries. What principle are we breaking here?
That one.
What principle of the 28 principles? We just talked about it. It was the problem that started World War I and World War II. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations. Entangling alliances with none. This sounds like an entangling alliance to me. The leader of a new coalition of partners among the various world countries. Now, let me read to you some of these words here, because I hope that you hear them and go, "Ah!" The American people should have. They didn't know what he was saying. In his speech to the American people, he said, this new leadership position for America would result in the creation of a condition fit for a new world order. Thank you for reacting, Joseph.
You're welcome.
An order that he said the countries could finally work together to police the world, prevent oppression, and help the needy.
Great! Become the world's babysitter.
A new world order is giving away your sovereignty. It is saying that we will have one world government. Let me tell you what this president said to a member of the White House. The word just left me. Press. What have you just announced? He said, if they knew what we had just announced, they would chase us down the street.
Maybe what?
If they knew what we had just announced, they would chase us down the street. He knew what he was creating was not A, what the American people would want, and B, constitutional. All right, so let's talk about Principle 28 here. The United
Constitution. Wait. Oh, okay.
Principle 28. The United States has a manifest destiny to be an example and a blessing to the entire human race. A manifest destiny, meaning that it is the Lord's plan for us, his mission for us as a nation to be an example and a blessing to the entire human race. Not, let's read the words, the leader of a new coalition of partners among the various world countries. Can you hear the difference between those two things? Do you hear it? Do you see it? Okay, because you need to understand that. What we are approaching and we are so close to is a new world order, a one world government, a lack of sovereignty, a lack of freedom, and the end of your best friend. That's what we're getting close to. So, the founding of this country is a singular event. I cannot point to a time in the history of this world that this existed on this kind of a scale to bless the entire world. The Israelites practiced it. The Anglo-Saxons practiced it, but we know now that the Anglo-Saxons were of Israel descent. They were just bringing the Mosaic law along. And we know that the Nephites lived it in the Book of Mormon. If you read Mosiah chapter 29, almost every one of these 28 principles is in Mosiah chapter 29. And if it's not there, you'll probably find it in Alma chapter 1. I will bring those out to you at some point. Maybe not here. Definitely on a video for Come Follow Me. But those 28 principles are true principles. How do you know? They're found in the scriptures. As I taught one year in history class, and my friend that owned the school in Lehigh said, these principles are in the scriptures. And I said, okay, I take that challenge. Because actually the Center for Constitutional Studies, where you end up getting your 5,000 leaps or your constitutions, the NCCS, they have a document on their website where all of those principles are found in the Bible. And I said, well, that's fine. I think it's good that they're found in the Bible, but I'll bet they're in the Book of Mormon too. And here's what I found. They were all in there. And I could always find a principle that I could roll into my history class, whether it was being kept or broken. I was always able to find a principle that went into my history as well. And it was interesting because I could always make it match up. It was, if you didn't understand how the Spirit works, it was almost eerie, because what I taught in Book of Mormon in the morning would match up with what I taught in history in the afternoon.
Fun.
Every time.
Actually, I remember that.
Every time. And I remember doing it once in a junior B class. So that's a classroom of students who are between the age of 8 and 12, generally 8 to 11. And I remember doing this, and you guys will remember Kelson, but he saw me do it. He saw me take it and lead it right into the next subject, which is language arts, and right through math and right through science and right into history. He's like, you just made that go with everything today. And I'm like, yeah, true principles. You can always teach them. It's amazing. And so I was able to weave it through, because you can always do that with true principles. When you learn true principles and you base your life on true principles, you are living celestial law. When you break a true principle, you are not. And so if you want the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, which is what we call exaltation, you live celestial principles. That's how you earn it. You don't just get to go there and learn it when you get there. You got to know it now. That's what this life is for. So this is something that's interesting, that the settlers in America, as they were brought over, they felt like they were Israel. They believed they were Israel. Their preachers were teaching them that they were Israel. Isn't that wild? That they were Israel, and that they were fulfilling a manifest destiny by coming to this nation and setting up this freedom of religion that they started with. Now remember, a lot of them had freedom of religion. They'd gone to Holland, right? They had freedom of religion. What they didn't have was a culture to help their children grow in the gospel, to be able to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Their children were beginning to take on the language and the customs of the country where they lived. And those customs especially did not match up with the biblical principles that they had to leave England for. Because remember, in England, their lives were in danger. They did not have the freedom to worship outside of Church of England. And so they went to Holland for that freedom, but then they discovered that the culture there was destroying their families, their children. And so coming to America was huge and hard. And they didn't all make it. But they felt this sense of mission, this sense of manifest destiny, that they had a work to perform. The interesting thing as you look at those communities is we have this anything goes, laissez-faire kind of an attitude in the world today. But they set up their communities based on Christian principles, and you were not allowed to live in that community if you didn't agree to live by those principles. You could be asked to leave the community, just like in an Israelite community. And people look at that, well, that's so wrong. No, to live in this community, you need to agree to these rules. It's fine if you don't want to live these rules. You just can't live here. We have forgotten that we have the right to say that about our communities. We actually do. What they have, and this is written by an American historian, his name is John Fiske. They believed they were doing a wonderful thing. They felt themselves to be instruments in accomplishing a kind of manifest destiny. Their exodus from Europe was that of a chosen people who were at length to lay the everlasting foundations of God's kingdom upon the earth. Wow. How could they have known? How could they have known? The first free people in the world, the founding of the gospel through the prophet Joseph Smith, how could they have known? To lay the everlasting foundations of God's kingdom upon earth. This steadfast faith was an unseen ruler and guide, was to them a pillar of cloud by day and of fire by night. It was of great moral value. It gave them clearness of purpose and concentration of strength, contributed towards making them, like the children of Israel, a people of indestructible vitality and aggressive energy. This is truly what they believed and what they saw of the work that they were doing. And so this has been expressed in nearly all inaugural addresses given by presidents of the United States as of this book. That sense of manifest destiny has been expressed in nearly all of the inaugural addresses by presidents of the United States. But it's very important to distinguish, okay? Because you can say the words and have them mean more than one thing. So it's important that we distinguish between a sense of mission, that's the manifest destiny, and the spirit of perverted chauvinism associated with the idea of racial superiority, and they can sound a lot alike. Sense of mission versus the spirit of perverted chauvinism. The former, the spirit of mission, is a call to exemplary leadership and service. Is that what President Bush was saying? No, it's not. The latter, that spirit of perverted chauvinism, is the arrogant presumption of a self-appointed role to conquer and rule. Is that what President Bush was saying? Absolutely what he was saying. Okay, so the distinction between the two is very easily perceived in the writings of many of our founding fathers. Here's something John Adams wrote. I always consider the settlement of America with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand scene and design in providence for the illumination of the ignorant, the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the world. Thomas Jefferson looked at the Constitution as the world's best hope. He wrote in a letter, he said that what had been accomplished in the United States will be a standing monument and example for the aim and imitation of the people of other countries. The founding fathers often expressed the responsibility that was placed on this country to perform that mighty task of being an example. An example, the manifest destiny to be an example and a blessing to the entire human race. So we have to be careful when we listen to the words of any kind of a leader, anyone trying to get us to do something. Are they looking at this as a sense of mission or a spirit of perverted chauvinism, superiority? I'm better, we're better. That's what you have to be careful of. John Adams wrote from England, because he was not there at the Constitutional Convention. The people of America have now the best opportunity and the greatest trust in their hands that Providence, meaning Heavenly Father, ever committed to so small a number. They knew that they were extremely in the minority in the world. And Alexander Hamilton said that it is reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Can we, by choice and by reflection, actually create something like this? And that's the thing that you have to watch for. And I think that they felt like that this received the approbation, the approval of their Heavenly Father. And then John Jay is also another of the founding fathers. He brought out 3 points that I thought were really interesting because he looked at the land itself. This is just the perfect land, the way the water was arranged, the different kinds of soils, the navigable waters, rivers that ran at convenient distances from each other that became kind of highways to be able to get things about. He just saw the land as being this perfect arrangement, just set up for success because you could grow the things you need to grow. You could get where you needed to get. There was no bad land. And remember, they had not settled very far into the east, but the original thought and some of the original charters for these colonies, they actually gave them the land from one side to the other. Now, nobody knew at that time how wide it really was, but the whole thought process from the very beginning of their settlement was that it would extend the entire continent. They just didn't think it was as big as it is. And then beyond that, he felt like, this is one connected country to one united people. We don't have pieces here and there and everywhere. It's one, all connected. You have a united people. They speak the same language. They have the same ancestors. They profess the same religion, and they're attached to the same principles of government. So all this sameness, ancestors, language, religion, government. And by their joint councils, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side, They have nobly established their general liberty and independence. Together they did that. No one group of people could say, we did it for you. Everyone had a part in that. And then he said, the country and the people were made for each other by the design of providence. So this land was just right. The people brought to it were the people that needed to be on this land. And together, it says, it appears as if it was the design of providence that an inheritance of so proper and convenient for a band of brethren united to each other by the strongest ties should never be split into a number of unsocial, jealous, and alien sovereignties. Remember the geography of Europe. Bunch of different countries, all divided from each other. Think about the United States. States, all united under one government. Okay? Very, very different. The founders knew that this was different than anything that had ever been formed on the whole entire earth. And so I've got a final quote here from James Madison. He says, "Is it not the glory of the people of America that, whilst they have paid a decent regard to the opinions of former times and other nations, we have looked at what happened in the past, we've looked at what's happening in other nations, a decent regard, they have not suffered a blind veneration for activity, for custom, or for names to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense." So just because it's done that way over there, or this person's big name was on it or whatever, we didn't allow that to overpower good sense. We looked at what was there, we thought about it, we used our good sense, and we used that. The knowledge of their own situation and the lessons of their own experience. To this manly spirit, posterity will be indebted for the possession, and the world for the example of the numerous innovations displayed on the American theater in favor of private rights and public happiness. They knew what they had formed. Now, here's his conclusion, and I want to conclude with it too. Happily for America, happily we trust for the whole human race, they pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human history, society. And that is true. When the French Revolution began, I think initially the American leaders felt like, oh, maybe the French are going to have the same kind of a system, but it wasn't the same kind of a revolution. No parallel in the annals of human society. They reared the fabrics of governments which have no model on the face of the globe. They formed the design of a great confederacy, which is incumbent on their successors, that's us, to improve and perpetuate. That is what they hoped. They hoped that we would improve and perpetuate our best friend, the Constitution of the United States. We will not get through all of the amendments tomorrow. And tomorrow is our last day of history. Joseph's crying a little tear over there. But I will go through some of them. If you don't yet have a copy of The Making of America, you need to find one. Whether you can find one used online or new online, it is not an inexpensive book, but it is a book that you absolutely want to have, because Dr. Skousen spent years and years and years studying the Constitution and learning and understanding what the different parts of the articles in the Constitution meant and why they were founded that way, but also the effect of each of the different amendments on our nation. So the book Making of America by Cleon Skousen is a vital book to understanding the Constitution itself. Now I will tell you, W is his first initial. So when you see it, it'll be W, Cleon Skousen. I will tell you, just like reading, comparatively speaking, this is the easiest book of all of them to read. And even this one, I end up going to dictionaries and looking up words. But eventually this becomes easier reading because you do it more. Not so easy reading until you learn to understand the language. You keep your dictionary close. Making of America helps to understand a lot of this. But even then, a lot of times in a section that as I was preparing to teach, I will tell you that I often would reread it and read it again and read it again. And I'd read it a different day because it still was like turning my head upside down. And then the next day I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I had to read it multiple times generally to really comprehend, because these ideas are so beautiful and so deep, and we don't think like this anymore, talk like this anymore, write like this anymore. Boy, have we lost a lot. Boy, have we lost a lot. It would probably be a good exercise for all of us to even just do copy work and copy quotes from these founding fathers, copy quotes out of the Federalist Papers or from the letters of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Abigail Adams and her husband, John Adams. Beautiful discourse back and forth. What an amazing woman Abigail was. What an amazing man John was. So really, these three things are pretty foundational to understanding what it is that we have in this nation. I don't know. We're kind of up in the air, but I would highly recommend some time spent in these books. Someone can teach it to you. It's true. But if you'll take the time to read it and study it and talk about it, this is great family discussion. Or maybe you put together a group of people who want to study this. Sometimes a group of people studying together is kind of forces you to learn something. And so that might be something you want to do. But these books help us to understand the Lord's plan for government, at least on this earth, and as close to celestial as we know how to get. So till tomorrow, when we'll spend a little bit more time talking just a little bit about the rise of terrorism and some more time in the Constitution. So we'll see you tomorrow.